Hello chess friends and welcome to out of Chess channel and welcome back to the TCEC Season 21 Superfinal between the two top engines Leela C0 and Stockfish 14. So after more than 45 games, Stockfish has a comfortable 3-point lead, and in my opinion it's almost like it's game over because Stockfish will probably win the Super event. Stockfish will probably win a new TCEC season, but still we want to of course cover more games because they're really beautiful with great strategical and tactical elements in the game. So that's why I decided to cover more games. It's really wild how these engines are playing the game. And today we're analyzing the game 43, in which Leela C0 played with the white pieces against Stockfish with the black pieces. It was really a beautiful positional game. I think this game is more understandable to us humans than maybe the Stockfish games, when Stockfish is playing a really brutal game with white pieces. And I think you've witnessed here really a beautiful bad bishop strategy. The bad bishop strategy is sort of a strategy when your opponent has maybe many pawns on light squares or on dark squares, it doesn't matter. Let's imagine your opponent has many pawns on light squares, then you want to keep him with his light square bishop on the board. Then this bishop is always blocked out by its own pawns a little bit, and then the knight would be much better, especially when this light square pawns are blocked, when they cannot move. So that's why this bishop becomes almost like a pawn chain, part of the pawn chain. So that's why we call it the bad bishop strategy, and then the knight is much better. So you witness really here a beautiful bad bishop strategy from an early stage of the game that was continued through the whole game, and that's why I think this game is also understandable to us humans, because it will be a beautiful strategical game here played by Leela C0. So let's check out now the game. Here d4 played by Leela C0, or d5 by Stockfish, c4 c6. This was still prearranged. We have the Slav defense on the board, knight to c3, knight to f6, knight to f3, and we have now the chameleon variation with the move a6. Here c5 was still prearranged, and now the last move that was prearranged by the organizer was the move bishop to g4, which is really not the best of moves. Better ideas are immediately to break the pawn chain here, the small pawn chain with the move b6, or if you want to bring your bishop out, bishop to f5 is more accurate, because after a move here, bishop to g4, white can use now a new tempo against the bishop, who can play now the move knight to e5. In the continuation, bishop to e6 was played by Stockfish 14. If you play e6, this could be maybe playable, but then you risk also this one, knight to g4, knight takes g4, then e4 is very tricky, of course, with the direct attack against the knight. If you play knight to f6, or even if you support the knight with h5, let's imagine knight to f6, then you get e5, knight to d7, and I think white has too much space. White has such a dominant position in the center, so strategically I think black is simply lost. So that's why here after move bishop to g4, we can notice that it's really not the best of lines that Stockfish 14 had to play here. After bishop to e6, we have now queen to b3, and we can, as I said, already know this one thing about those positions. Let's stop it, really evaluate the position. Again, I'm pointing out many pawns are on light squares, and these pawns are immobile. We have to say it like this, because the mobility of these pawns is not so good, so the pawn structure on the queen side is blocked. So that's why you see probably no pawn movements are possible here on the queen side. So that's why already the bishop on e6 is not a good piece, because of course the dark square bishop still can be developed with g6, bishop to g7, where it of course can attack maybe the d4 pawn, or as a long-term plan we can break through here with the move e5 after the bishop comes of course on g7. So that's why the dark square bishop, although temporarily it's blocked out by its pawn, by its own pawn on e7, but it can be developed of course by fianchetto with g6, bishop to g7. So as I said, I simply don't like the light square bishop of black. So from this point on, Leela C0 is playing basically a bad bishop strategy against this bishop on e6. So be prepared. This is really a brilliant strategical game here by Leela C0. So here rook to a7, of course, first protecting the b7 pawn. We have now e3. Now of course Leela C0 is also blocking a little bit the bishop out on c1, but we have to support, I think, further our pawn chain. That's our main strategical advantage that white has built here, of course, the space advantage on the 5th rank. So that's why we have to support also further the d4 pawn, which is of course supporting the c5 pawn. So we have now g6. Now comes this fianchetto idea by Stockfish 14, bishop to d2, bishop to g7, and now f3 taking over here here, because also opportunities are here to play knight to e4 after something like knight takes e4. Here d takes e4 comes of course with the direct attack against the queen, so that's why f3, very important move here by Leela C0, taking here this very important square for black's knight. So knight from f to d7, knight takes d7, we have bishop to d7, although also here maybe knight to d7 is a possibility, maybe then as a long-term plan to break the position with the move b6, but again I'm pointing out then really the bishop is bad. You can never then afterwards to play the move e5. You have to play I think e5, because you want here from black's perspective to break here the pawn chain that white has built here. So that's why bishop to d7 here played by Stockfish 14. We have now queenside castling by Leela C0, and now after kingside castling we have now knight to a4. So we are not allowing really never black to play anymore here this move b5. So you see now this pawn on c5 is almost holding the whole queen side. So when it comes to positional understanding, now one pawn is holding basically 3 of black's pawns. So that's why here on the queen side of course it's a dominant position, but now black has also prepared here the central pawn breakthrough with the move e5, which of course Stockfish 14 played immediately. Bishop, we have e5, we have now d takes e5, bishop to e5, and now g4. When it comes to again positional understanding on the king side, Leela C0 is of course trying an attack here against the fianchetto. Where one of the best ways to beat the fianchetto is always a flank attack with h4, h5, and similar ideas. So here in the continuation we have bishop to g7, h3, fixing first the pawn structure on the king side. After move a5, now again I'm pointing out we have still this bad bishop strategy, because still this bishop is only part of the pawn chain. Even if you play something like I don't know bishop to e6, here again we could maybe play sort of a blockade here around the square d4. So that's why Leela C0 trades off now the bad bishop here on d2 for the best piece of black for the dark square bishop. So great positional trade of pieces. So simply giving up a bad piece for your opponent's really best piece on the board. Brilliant move here, the move bishop to c3. So bishop takes c3, queen to c3, and you see now we're controlling now the d4 square. The only way that this light square bishop can be improved is by potential d4 move. Then the bishop would be very powerful, of course aiming towards the queen side, but so far with the move queen to c3, with this pawn on e3, with the rook on d1, of course white is controlling here the potential d4 move of black. So that's why here the bad bishop is still here present on d7. What we would love to do is maybe trade off this bishop when it comes to now further positional trades of pieces. We would love to trade off this bishop for this knight, because this knight is still flexible. This knight can maybe find some roots into the game. So if bishop knight to a6 happen, I think that white will immediately take out here the knight on a6 and then cement the knight further here on b6. So or maybe try for different ideas, maybe knight to c3, knight to e2, and then maybe knight to d4 would be also a very powerful knight. The knight would be centralized here in the center of the board. Then maybe when we have fixed the position in the center, then again it's time to push pawns here h4, h5, and trying to open the position. So these are the positional trades of pieces. So as I said, from white perspective, we want to give up our light square bishop for our opponent's knight here on b8. So here queen to e7, h4, continuing the pressure against the fianchetto. As we said, bishop to e6. Here Stockfish 14 is desperately trying to improve the position of the light square bishop. We have h5, knight to d7, h6. Here also a very important move, already threatening checkmate on g7. So that's why f6. We have e4, a really wild move here by Leela C0. And now we have already reached, I think, the critical moment of the game. There are now maybe opportunities to play d takes e4, but again I think white is much better because of this continuation. We have rook to e1. The problem is now you cannot play e takes f3, then you get of course rook takes e6, here queen to e6, bishop to c4 is happening, so you lose the queen. So you would be pretty much forced to play something like bishop to d5, but then again bishop to c4 happens. Here knight takes c5, knight takes c5, here queen to c5. You cannot of course play like this. You cannot play bishop to d5, c takes d5, knight to c5, then rook to c8 is happening, so you lose the battle here on the c file. That's not possible, so that's why you have to play, I think, here something like pardon me, let's go back here. You have to play knight takes c5, queen takes c5, then bishop to d5, queen to d5, but now rook takes e4 is, I think, a much better position for white, because here in the continuation we can play rook to d1, and both of these rooks will occupy, of course, this open files. But that was, in my opinion, still even the best continuation here for Stockfish 14. That, I think, had to be played, because the continuation that Stockfish now played here, rook to a8, is simply too passive, because it gives now Leela C0 the opportunity to take e takes d5. Now after c takes d5 we have king to b1, improving first the position of the king. If you play something like rook to c8 here, in order maybe to continue the pressure on the pawn on c5, then queen to d4 is happening, and you see now you cannot take because of the fork here on b6. The problem is now you cannot even attack this pawn with rook from a to c8, because then you're leaving your here a5 pawn unprotected. So far not possible to continue the pressure around the square c5. So that's why after move king to b1, here knight to e5, we have bishop to b5, we have rook to d8, and now rook to f1, protecting also this f3 pawn. We have now g5, knight to b6, and now finally this idea knight to c6. And what have we said? We want to give up our bishop for the knight. That's exactly what happened. Bishop to c6, now positional trades of pieces. After b takes c6, again I'm pointing out, again the bishop is only part of this small pawn chain here. The bishop is always stuck to the defense of these two pawns, where of course the knight will find, okay, it's not maybe the best piece because it's simply too far away from the action, it's simply on the edge of the board, but in long terms the knight will find maybe it's square d6 here, will find maybe here a square d4. When the knight comes maybe on these two squares, then it's again a powerful piece. So here king to a1, we have a rook to e8, we have rook to h1, queen to f7, a3, queen to g6, and now rook to d2, we have bishop to f7, rook to d4, again this blockade against this potential d4 move. Here in the continuation we have rook to e2, knight to c4, great move. Now it gives Leela c0 the opportunity to get the knight again on the best square on the board, on the square d6, because you cannot take because of the pin here on the d file. Here in the continuation we have rook to b8, and now rook to d2, rook takes d2, again knight to d2. Okay, again the knight is maybe not the best piece, again it needs further improvement, but again I'm pointing out knight to b3, then maybe knight to d4 is also a great opportunity, where the knight is attacking the c6 pawn, then again the bishop has to retreat, then the bishop is again a bad piece. So again really wild stuff here. The bad bishop strategy is still present. It was in the beginning a bad bishop strategy, still it is a bad bishop strategy by Leela c0. So a4 here taking over, of course, this square for the knight. The knight cannot jump on b3, but actually after the move a4 this pawn becomes more and more of a problem, because in the continuation it will be a main weakness, and if white manages now to take out this pawn, then white would have here a 3 versus 1 majority on the queen side, where of course white can create a dangerous pass pawn. So here bishop to e6, queen to d4, we have a rook to e8, knight to g3, we have a knight to king to f7, queen to d1, finally now attacking the pawn. We have f5, rook to g1. If you play now here queen to h6, then of course we can take out this one, it comes with the tempo, and then afterwards we can take out this one, sneaking in with the queen maybe to the 7th rank, where again the king could be endangered. Again also the c6 would be weakened. So far taking the h6 pawn is not an opportunity. Here in the continuation we have now f4, we have a knight to e2, queen takes h6, but now rook to h1, attacking the queen, queen to g7, and now also Leela c0 takes a pawn, but now also with the opportunity to again I'm pointing out to cement really the knight around the square d4. Really brilliant positional play by Leela c0. Bishop to d7, knight to d4. You see again this bishop is only defending this pawn's really bad bishop strategy through the whole game. So knight to d4, h5, g takes h5, queen to f6, h6. Now here Leela c0 simply push the pawn. We have king to h8, queen to b4, rook to f8, and now Leela c0 is again trying for new improvements of the pieces. We have a rook to rook to f7, and now king to a2. We have rook takes h7, rook to d1. We have rook to e7, and now queen to b4, queen to f8, and now the queen, as we said, is sneaking into the game. The queen is getting, of course, very active. What we want to do is maybe get the queen somehow here. Also, rook to h1 is a new threat. The king is basically naked here. On the other hand, of course, white's king is so far not endangered on the square a2. So here, queen to c8. We have here queen takes c8, bishop to c8, and now after move b4, here what we have said, a4, now b5 is the main opportunity. Now it's time to simply create some passes and of course win this endgame. So rook to c7, we have now a4, king to g7, rook to c1, we have king to f6, b5, very important move. We have bishop to b7, king to b3. The king gets of course more centralized. We have g4, f takes g4, king to e5, knight to f3. We have knight to g5 again. Here is move king to e5, but now again the king gets more and more active. Here we have again this 3 versus 1 situation. In the continuation, we have now king to f6, knight to f3. We have a rook to e7, king to a5. We have bishop to c8. Now g5 is here an opportunity. King to g7, rook to e1, trying to simplify the game by trading off the rooks, which was a good choice, I think. We have here rook to e3, rook takes e3. Here we have f takes e3, and now knight to d4. You see this knight is holding both of these pawns. This is still an annoying pawn, and still this is of course the dangerous pass pawn. In the continuation, we have now bishop to g4. We have now b6. Again, if you play something like of course e2, we can simply take a bishop to e2, and now there's no way that this bishop is catching up anymore this pawn. So that's why after move b6, the bishop has to retreat. We have now bishop to c8. We have king to b4 here. King to g6, king to c3. Now the king is marching towards this pawn, and now a brilliant move here by Leela c0, knight to c6. If you take, of course, then these 2 pawns will simply get too advanced. Here you get simply this one. If you try to maybe compete here, then we can simply play this one, and then you cannot catch up anymore with this pawn. b7 is happening, and it's game over. So after move knight to c6, it's obviously a losing game here for Stockfish. We have d4, knight takes d4, king to g7, c6, here b7 promotion. Here knight to f3, protecting everything, now pushing the pawn further. c7, king to h5, c8 the promotion, bishop to e6. Here takes, and in this position Stockfish resigns. So great game by Leela c0. Great bad bishop strategy from the beginning. It was such a worst such a bad piece, this light square bishop of blacks. Through the whole game it was only a defensive piece that had to protect the light square pawns. Meanwhile, you see the knight danced all over the board. That's exactly how Leela c0 of course can only, I think, win games when it comes to positional understanding. I think Leela is there with Stockfish 14, but when it comes to this tactical games, then maybe Stockfish 14 is slightly better. That's exactly, I think, the reason why Stockfish is in the lead of the TCEC season 21. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this positional brilliancy play by Leela c0. If you want to see more positional brutal and tactical games, check out my commented chess games, the best chess games played by engines. Here's the link of our whole series, more than 230 games. You can check them out if you have time, with also some different ideas and different openings. And if you want to see humans battling it out in their best chess games, check out my best chess games of all time series, with some great games from the past played by Garry Kasparov, Mikhail Tal, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.